Hey guys, this is Tech Howdy. I welcome you to another video tutorial where we are building this CMS application using ASP.NET Core 3 and Angular 10. In the last video tutorial, we finished implementing the activities model where we will add all the activities in the activity table. In this video tutorial, we will start working on the views that are related to the user's profile and activity details. So if we click on the user's image in the admin panel, which is located on the top bar, we will see the options to display the user's profile, security information, and activity log. If I click on profile, I'll see the profile details. If I click on the security, I'll see the options to change the password. And if I click on the activity log, I can see all the activities that are related to the user. Now, to work on this particular view, we need to create a controller for profile. We have already created this controller when we started working on our area section, but our controller does not have the related views that we need to display the user details. So let's go ahead and create the corresponding views and the logic to display the user's details. So in the profile controller, we would need three action methods, and all these action methods will be returning a task of type iActionResult. I've replaced the default index method with the async task index method. I've added two additional methods. One is a method that returns the security view and one which returns the activity view. Now we need to create a constructor where we can instantiate certain objects that we will use in our controller class. So here I will create the required objects. I need a object of type cookie service. I need the access to service provider to get related services that I would need. I would need access to the data protection keys section because I need to decrypt certain tokens or any other values. I need access to the decryption keys, and I need access to the app settings section. So I'm going to add the import statement using ModelService, and for the cookie service I would need to add the import statement for cookie service project. That's it. Now we need certain other services, but before we add those services over here in the controller, we need to create them. So the first service that we would need will be the user service. So we need to create a user service project so that user service project can contain all the required methods that we would need to fetch the user details or to perform any CRUD operations on the user table. So let's right click on our project and add a new project. We will go to Web and Console, select library, class library, make sure it's .NET Core class library, hit next. Here we will name this project as UserSVC, and then we will name this project as User Service, and then we will make sure that the project is being created in the folder that contains all the projects or all the class library projects. So let's go and select the folder, click open, and now we can go ahead and create this user service project. In the user service project, we will delete the default class that is created. Now let's go ahead and add two more classes that we would need. We would need a class called as UserSVC, and we need to also add an interface that will extend this class. So let's go ahead and add a interface. We'll call this interface as iUserSVC. Now let's make sure that the user class implements this interface. Here let's go ahead and define the required methods that we would need when we are fetching the user's detail or performing any CRUD operations on the profile controller. So here in the user service, at the moment we just require one method which will return the user's profile. and it will return the user's profile based on the user's ID. Now this will return an object of type ProfileModel, which will contain all the properties related to the user's profile. Let's go ahead and create this ProfileModel. We store all our models in the model service. Therefore, we will create the profile model inside the model service project that we have created. So let's right click, add a new class. Let's call this class as profile model, hit new. We will get rid of the constructor, and here we will add all the required properties that we need to be associated with the user's profile. So the required properties that we need, I have added them in the profile model class. We will also be returning a collection of users' addresses and the activities associated with that user. Now for user address, the user can have multiple address like shipping address and the billing address. Therefore, I have created a interface. I've used the interface collection for displaying or returning these values associated with the user address. And as you know, activities will have multiple user activities, so we would also need to return a collection of the activities. So let's add the missing reference to system collections.generic to use the iCollection or the interface collection object. Now that should be it for the profile model that we need in this project. So let's go back to the user service, and now let's add the missing reference. Since we have created a new project, user service, this user service project doesn't have any references for model service. So let's add the project reference by right clicking on your user service project, add reference, and then choose the model service project and click OK. We'll also at the same time add reference to the logging service because we would need it to log any errors. So let's click OK now, and now the packages are being restored. Once the packages are successfully restored, we can then add the missing import statement. So let's go ahead and add it using model service, and this should now clear this error. Now we can write all our logic inside this code block for returning the user's profile model. Before that, let's go ahead and copy this method and add it to the interface so that we can access it from some other class in our project. We'll also add the missing import statements to the profile model and tasks. Let's go back to the user service, and now let's write our logic inside this particular method. So before we go ahead and create any logic or implement any logic in this particular class, we would need access to certain projects. Let's go ahead and add that references. So right click on your user service project, go to add, and make sure that you have referenced the following projects, which is activity service, cookie service, data service, and your logging service and the model service. So once you have referenced these projects, click OK. Now here we would need to instantiate certain objects that we will use in the logics of our different methods that we will be creating in the user service. We will instantiate these objects using dependency ingestion. And if you are not familiar with dependency ingestion, I will recommend you to please read the documentation from Microsoft Docs on dependency ingestion. So now go ahead and now let's instantiate the objects that we need. So I have added the objects that need to be instantiated. We would need an object of type user manager. We would need the iHosting environment interface access, since we want to fetch the user's profile picture, and the profile picture would be stored on the server in a folder, not inside the database table. We will also need the import for application DB context, our cookie service, activity service, and the service provider and data protection keys section. The data protection key section because we would need the access to the keys to decrypt the data. We would need service provider access because we would need access to certain services. Now here in the get user profile ID by async method, we are going to return a profile model. Therefore, I have instantiated and created a user profile model. Now we are going to fetch the user details from the database and map the required properties to user profile model. So let's go ahead and add that logic. Before we add the logic to get the user details from the database, we need to make sure that the request that is coming in to get the user's detail is a valid request. And we need to make sure that the user who's currently logged in is making the request to get their own profile ID or profile details. If a user who's logged in is trying to get someone else's user details, then this will be a security flaw. Therefore, we need to make sure that the ID that we received in this request matches the ID of the user who's currently logged in. So we are going to create an extension method to validate who is the currently logged in user. I'm creating an extension method here and not implementing the logic inside this method. That's because we will use this extension method in many methods that we are going to create inside this user service. Currently, we are only implementing get user profile ID by async by ID. We will also implement get user profile by email by username as well. So we would need that extension method we would need that logic in that method as well. So we will create a separate extension method and that can be used in multiple methods. So here I have called this extension method as get logged in user ID, which will return a string, which is basically the ID of the logged in user. If it cannot find the currently logged in user, or if there is an error while decrypting the token, then it will return null. So if there is anyone who is trying to change the token, trying to manipulate the stored token in the cookie, then we would not be able to decrypt it. And once we are not able to decrypt it, we will receive an error and we will return null. So here we are using provider to get the service iData protection provider, which will be used to decrypt or unprotect the token, which is the user ID token. Now this user ID cookie is basically stored in the applications browser tabs application, and here we have a cookie called as user ID, which is encrypted using iData protection. So we are going to decrypt this same cookie using iData protection to get the actual value. And then once we have the actual value, we basically have the user ID. Now what we want to do is this user ID, we need to make sure we get the user details based on this user ID that we have on the browser, not based on what we have received over here in the parameters of this method. So here I have added the logic that's required to return the profile details of the user. So let's first look at the first statement over here, which is the variable which is storing the value of the get logged in user ID method. This is the extension method which is going to return the user ID. Now we will, based on this user ID, we will use our user manager object and call the method find by ID async and pass the ID that we received after decrypting the token or cookie. Now if we are able to fetch any user, then this user value will not be null, and if it is null, then we will return null in the response. Then we create a try catch block over here where we are trying to map over the values of the user properties to our profile model. Here I would need to add a reference to system.collections.generic because the address is a collection of addresses, and also to link I will add the references. Now we need to make sure that we are going to return a error, or sorry, we are going to make sure we log any errors that we receive while mapping these properties. And also you might be wondering that why I'm not using a automapper class to map the properties of the application user to the profile model. Well, we are going to make use of automapper in this project, but I have kept it on a separate video tutorial. I'm going to do it on a separate video tutorial. That's because I don't want to mix things. I don't want to make it confusing. We will have a video tutorial on its own in this project where I will teach you how to use automapper, where you can map the properties using automapper package from Microsoft. So I will teach you that. So for now, we will just manually try to map all these properties that we have from application user to profile model, and then we will return the user profile. So once we have the user profile, we can go back to our profile view and then display that user profile on the view that we will be creating. So for the get user profile by ID async, that should be it for this method. We need to make sure now we go back to the profile controller and implement or call that method from the profile controller. Before we start consuming the method that we just created in the user service, we need to import the user service project in our main project. So let's go ahead and add the reference to the user service project. For the main project, we are going to have the following references. So make sure you have all these references, which is the auth service, cookie service, data service, filter service, logging service, and the user service that we just created. Click OK. Now here we would need to instantiate certain objects. We will go ahead and instantiate those objects that we will need, and we will instantiate these objects using dependency ingestion. So here I have created the user service object, instantiated all these objects using dependency ingestion, and assigned these values of the injected objects to the read-only objects that we have created. Now here we want to also create certain other views in our admin panel. So if we go back to the finished project, when we click on the profile, or when we click on the image, we have the profile view, we have the security view, which contains the reset password options, or the reset password model we can call it, and we can create a model now for reset password model. We also would need a model for activity which we have already created, so we don't need to create a new activity model. Now we would have to make sure that we instantiate all these objects while we pull the user's profile or pull the admin's profile. Since we are working on the area section which belongs to the admin, I'm going to create a extension method here which will set the base admin view, and the base admin view is responsible to instantiate all the required objects that we need for the admin view model or for the admin area. So let's go ahead and create this. It might sound a bit confusing now, but you will understand when we use this base view model. So if we go back to the finished project, here when we look at the admin view, when the admin logs in, we have certain sections of these application that are visible, like the user models where we will display all the users. We have the settings section which will show all the site related settings. We have the profile, security, activity log. So all these models are part of the admin view. So we can add the required models that we need to be instantiated or to be set for the admin in the base view model that we are going to create. So in our project, let's go ahead and add a class in the model service. We will call this class as admin base view model, and here inside this admin base view model we will add all these object properties that we need to be set for the base view of the admin panel. So here I'm going to add all the required uh, properties or the objects. Now there are certain objects that we have not yet created. We will create the models for these objects. First we have added the profile model which already exists, and we are going to display the profile details using these profile models. Then we also have added a add user model. We would need this model because in our user or in the users section we have the all users section where we have an option to add a new user, and this particular view also has certain properties, and we are going to make sure that the add user model will contain all those properties. So let's go ahead and add this add user model in the base view or the admin base view model. So I'm going to copy this and add a class. I'm going to call this class as AddUserModel. For the naming conventions, you can use your own naming conventions. You don't have to follow the project naming convention. We don't need the constructor in the model class, and now we will add the required properties that we need here. So here I will add the import statement for using system component model.DataAnnotation before I add the properties. And then we will add all the required properties that we would need when we want to create a user. So the admin will use this model when the admin is going to add a new user from the backend. So here in the AddUserModel, I have used certain attributes like required, which basically means that this particular property needs to be provided, or it needs to have a value when the form is submitted. We have used the email address attribute here, which specifies that this input value is of type email, so it will be validated. We have also used a regular expression to validate the input to make sure that the input that is entered is a valid email. So if it's invalid, then the regular expression will throw an error. And for the display name, we have used the display name as email that can be used in the label of the razor syntax. So you can read up on the attributes of data annotation and get more information on it using Microsoft's documentation. But these are the following attributes that we have used. The other attribute that we have used, the string length, is basically how long you want the string to be entered in the input. So we have used different properties, and you can find more information on these attributes that we have used on the data annotation class from Microsoft documentation. And I will add the link in the video description, and you can read the documentation. So that's all the properties that we need. If there are any properties that have no attributes, which means that they are not required. So for the AddUserModel class, that should be it. Now let's go ahead back to the admin base view model, and here we would create another model in our application. We'll call it the dashboard model. This dashboard model will be responsible for these cards that you see on the home page of the admin model, which is displaying the total posts, pending approval, new users, and these information that you see when the page loads. This would be done by the dashboard model, or the values on these cards will be mapped over to the properties of the dashboard model. So let's copy this and add it to our model service. So let's quickly add it. New class, dashboard model. I'll add it, and we don't need the constructor over here. So I'm going to add the properties, which is total users, new users, pending requests, and total posts. Although we are not implementing blogging in this project for this video tutorial series, I have created two cards which display certain values, but these are static values which are added, which are hard coded in our code, whereas the other two cards where you see the total users and new users, this will be dynamic based on the actual values that we receive from the database. So that's done for the dashboard model. Now going back to the admin base view model, we have to create a object for SendGridOptions. Now SendGridOptions is SendGrid is a email provider that we will be using to send email to users in our application. So if we go to settings, we have a section called as email settings, and we have two options over here. We can use SendGrid as the email provider in our project, or we can use SmtpOptions, that is, we can use Gmail as our email provider, and I will show you how to use both these services to send emails to users in the video tutorial series. So before we go ahead and use them, we need to create a model object that can hold all the properties values associated with SendGrid and SMTP. So therefore, in the project, I have created a class called as SendGridOptions and SmtpOptions. So let's go ahead and add these classes to the model service. So let's go back to the SendGrid option and get rid of the constructor and add the required properties. So for the SendGrid options, we will use the following properties, which is the SendGrid user, the API key that we will receive once we sign up with SendGrid. That will be your username, your email, that will basically be the email from where we are going to send these emails to our users. The from full name and the is default basically will be used. This flag will be used in the application to specify if we want to use this particular email provider as the default provider to send emails. So let's go ahead and also create SMTP settings class, add the properties to the SmtpOptions. Here we don't need the constructor. Since we are going to use Google or Gmail service to send the emails, we would need the following properties, where we would need the SMTP username, the password, the host, port number, the value to save the object or the email is using SSL, our actual Gmail email, and the from full name, and once again the is default property, which will be used to specify that if we want to use this email service as the default email provider. Now, even though we are using a Gmail service here as for the SmtpOptions, you can use your own email service provider like Yahoo or some other email provider. But when you use your own email provider, you would need these particular values like host, port number, and username and password. So you can replace it with your own email provider. So now let's go back to the application and the admin base view model. So now we need to implement the reset password view model. So let's copy this and add this to our model service. And let's go back to the admin base view model and also add the site-wide settings. Now the site-wide settings will be used for the site settings, where we will specify the site's name, the author, the description, which can be used for SEO related purposes. So I'll go back to the model service and add this class and hit new. So we don't need the constructor in site-wide settings, and we will add the required properties. So here I'm going to add the following properties, which is the website name, title, description, keywords, the footer, what text we want to show on the footer of the website, the author, the website status if it's active or it's in maintenance mode, registration if we are accepting any registration, and the age verification value. Do we need to check age verification for someone who's accessing this website? So let's go to the reset password view model, get rid of the constructor and add the required properties. So for the reset password view, if we go to security, we need a property for old password, new password, and confirm password. So let's go here back to the model and add the properties. So here in the reset password view model, I have added the values with some attributes using data annotations. So I should need to add the using system component model.dataAnnotations reference, and I've used regular expression to validate the inputs. Also, you will notice that I have an extra property called as code. Whereas if the admin is changing the password, we would not be sending them any code in the email. But if a regular user is trying to reset their password, we will send them a code in their email, and they would need to provide that code while they are resetting the password. So we would need this property called as code. And when we are going to reset the password, I will show you how we are going to implement this feature. So for now, we would need this property, and now the reset password view model also is complete. So let's save all our files to make sure that all the data is being saved. Now let's go back to the profile controller, and here in the profile controller, we are going to create a object of type admin base view model, but this object is going to be static, so that once it is instantiated or once it is created, we can call the same object from the memory of our application. We don't need to instantiate it again, because this object will be fetching a lot of models that we created in the admin base view models. So once it is created, we can just access it from the memory of the application. So now when we go back to the set admin base view model, let's go ahead and implement the logic to instantiate the models that we just added to the base view model, and let's go ahead and add it over here. So here in the set admin base view model method, I'm going to instantiate the following properties. I have set the dashboard property to null, and I have also set the app settings as well as the add user property to null. That's because when the application will load and when we want to fetch the profile information from the profile controller, we only need these profile and security options to be instantiated. We don't need other options like users information, all user information and setting information to be instantiated until and unless the admin clicks on the sections for users and settings. So we will just instantiate the following models for profile and security, and for the other models that we have in the admin base view model, we will set them to null. Now the next thing that I want to do is import the missing references to ASP netcode data protection, and we also want to add the reference to dependency injection, so microsoft.extensions.dependency injection. So I'll go ahead and add it over here. This will get rid of the errors that we see in the get service method for the provider. Now we have all the required properties which have been set over here. We need to add one more project that we will do in the upcoming video tutorial to set the site-wide setting. But for now, what we need is just the following properties to be instantiated in the set admin base view model, and in the next video tutorial we'll work on the views. So the next video tutorial will be the continuation of our profile controller class that we are working on. So for this video tutorial, this should be it. If you have any questions, use the comment section, and for the code you can refer to the link in the video description, which is for the DevOps repo. Thank you once again. Please like and subscribe the channel GitHub.